afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Yoshiaki. I'm an operating advisor of USJI. And I used to be a professor of economics at Waseda. And I used to work for a bank for a long time in Washington, D.C. Today, we would like to welcome Professor Watanabe. He's going to talk about very complicated part of trade issues, trade negotiations. As I said, I studied also economics like legal, and I can see very interesting areas that he's going to deal with. So, first of all, I have to welcome all of you. Thank you very much for your comment. And let's hear his talk for 30 to 40 minutes, and then open the discussion to the floor. And I'm expecting that you're going to ask one question, is remarks or comment. And I expect good ones. So let me introduce Professor Watanabe.
Thank you very much. The other way around, actually. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, Professor Abe, for kindly introducing myself. My name is Yori Watanabe. I'm from Keio University. And this time I had occasion to speak on the international trade issues, particularly the TPP and Prime Minister Abe's growth strategy. And that was yesterday morning at the Peterson Institute for International Economics. And I had the occasion to speak to the ex-president of Waseda University a couple of days ago, and he got the kind of idea that maybe this would be a good occasion for Watanabe to speak on the other occasion here at the JSPS. So I yes, felt very honored, and it's really a privilege for me to speak at this forum. Ladies and gentlemen, today I try to make my talk slightly different from the one that I made yesterday. And maybe I speak a little bit more about WTO or international trade regime that is embodied in WTO, and all the regional arrangements so far that have been undertaken in the region of Asia Pacific. So let me start today's content, outline of my presentation. I'd like to start with some current issues, describing some uncertainties and possible risks on the international trade regime, both the global and the regional dimensions. Then that'll be followed by how the Asia-Pacific region or countries in the region try to be faced up with those challenges and their possible responses. Then I'd like to touch upon briefly Japan's strategy on economic partnership agreement that's largely known as EPA, and its ramifications on TPP and RCEP. And finally, I'd like to conclude with my own sort of suggestions to go beyond regionalism, taking advantage of possible frameworks of international trade, such as TPP, as inter-regional arrangements between Asia and Pacific, and the other one that Japan is now undertaking with the European Union, bilateral FTA with the European Union, and of course the regional comprehensive economic partnership in East Asia. So ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to start with this, uncertainties and possible risks. First of all, the failure of DDA. I spent about how many years? More than 5 years in Geneva. And that was during the Uruguay round negotiations. I spent 5 years in Geneva from 1985 to 1990. So I'm the lucky one to be engaged in the successful conclusion of Uruguay round. And we made a lot of good progress, particularly in the area what we call the new area issues, such as trade and services, TRIPS, trade-related intellectual property rights, and also TRIMS, trade-related investment measures. And also the Uruguay round was the first occasion where very substantial negotiation, liberalization, in the agriculture trade have been made. It is only after the Uruguay round that the agriculture trade has been the negotiation in the international trade negotiations such as the GATT or WTO. So in comparison with this Uruguay round, the Doha round, this is the formal name of Doha round is Doha Development Agenda, therefore I put it in DDA. And this failure of DDA result in kind of weakening of the trade multilateralism embodied in the WTO. The WTO is now the membership of 159 members, and it is extremely difficult to get consensus amongst those countries, particularly because we got many developing countries, and it is very difficult to get a consensus out of these large membership. And the second event, I put it proliferation of bilateral and regional trade agreements. That is more or less the results of the first event, the failure of DDA. Because of this failure of DDA, many countries made very active recourse to regional endeavors to liberalize their trade and investment. So according to JETRO's research this year, I think there are about 250 cases of free trade agreements or regional trade arrangements all over the world. And the same JETRO report of 2012, it was 221. So there's an increase of somewhat more 20 more FTAs in the world. So it's still proliferating, it's still increasing in number. The third indent I'd like to draw your attention to this lack of multilateral trade rules on new agenda, new issues. That was the end of 1994 that we concluded the Uruguay round negotiations, and it is strikingly surprising that since then no multilateral rule agreed upon. So more than 20 years, unfortunately, the trade rules beyond what we have in WTO has never been agreed upon. So that's really the problem. And what are those problems where we have no agreement? That is investment. We have TRIMS, but beyond TRIMS, we don't have any multilateral agreement on investment. There was a very significant efforts and endeavors made in the OECD to make MAI. MAI is a multilateral agreement on investment. And unfortunately, just like ITO Charter, known as Havana Charter, that was voted back in 1948, this MAI, unfortunately, never came into existence, although the MAI agreement itself has been drafted. So draft is there, but unfortunately it never came into force. So there's no multilaterally agreeable rules on investment. Competition either. We tried in at the beginning of Doha round negotiations, those issues such as investment, competition, and transparency in the government procurement, those issues have been known as Singapore issues, and together with trade facilitation, those issues are to be considered during these Doha round negotiations, but unfortunately we couldn't get consensus in Cancun meeting in September 2003. So since then, there was no agreement on even to discuss those issues. So those three issues, particularly investment, competition, and government procurement, are really not being discussed in the WTO. In addition, we have also those issues of state-owned enterprises flourishing in the centrally planned economy, such as Vietnam, or socialist capitalist economy, or socialist market economy of China. Labor and environment, those issues are also kind of pending issues. Fourth element of uncertainties, that is TPA, which is missing for the moment since August 2007. The missing TPA stands for Trade Promotion Authority. It is very confusing when in Japan when we talk about TPP and we have to talk about TPA, and now the third element, TTIP, is a transatlantic thing. So it's really confusing, particularly to Japanese audience when I make any lectures, public lectures in Tokyo. But anyway, this TPA is a very difficult issue, and it may be very touchy issue here, sensitive issue here in Washington, D.C. in particular. But for the trade negotiators, if United States trade representatives, if they are not equipped with this TPA, it gives enormous concern to those people who are the other side of the table, the trade negotiators from the other negotiating countries. So that is also it's an element to increase uncertainties. Lastly, the Ambassador Azevedo of Brazil, now he is Director General of WTO. And he has a very well-found sort of background, and he's a real connoisseur of WTO issues. So for his personal quality or caliber, I have no problem, and there would be no problem. But I would like to draw your attention to the fact that this is the first time that none of the developed countries supported candidate of the DG for WTO, and that has certainly some ramifications, negative effects of that. So those are the uncertainties that I could talk about in the global trade issues or global dimensions. Next is on the regional trade issues, which would be a source of some concerns. First, East Asia discriminates against East Asia. That's protectionism in East Asia. And then I'd like to draw your attention to this table that it is clear that we have still very high duty rates, although all the ASEAN countries or other countries like Japan, China, Korea have been making large efforts. But those, the duty rates on the relatively unsophisticated area of light industries or food and beverages, the duty rates are higher than those in the case of EU versus EU or NAFTA versus NAFTA countries. So that is, although ASEAN itself has been making a lot of efforts to lower their duties, but still, you know, the agriculture tariffs or the tariffs on sensitive products such as textiles and footwear remain very high. So that issue is one of the issues that I'd like to draw your attention to. And the second and third, somewhat related, China emerges as a regional hegemonic power. At the same time, China plays a role of kind of game changer. And that was quite clear when at the beginning of this first half of this year, China disputed with the European Union about their solar panels. And that was largely on the anti-dumping issues. And European Union, particularly the European Commission, DG Trade, found that the solar panel made in China is the dumped product, so they put the anti-dumping duties. But China reacted very strongly, and Prime Minister Li he met Madame Angela Merkel, the German Chancellor, to talk about this, and enormous pressure being put on Chancellor Merkel. And the European Commission has been, again, pressured by the German government. And that was the first occasion that we've never seen that kind of change in the policy of anti-dumping. Once decided by European Commission, and then later changed by the request from the member states, that was Germany. So it's very striking, sort of surprising issue, particularly to the third country like Japan. And Japan is also producing country of solar panel, and directly or indirectly, our solar panel producers have been very much adversely affected by this disputed case between China and European Union. So those are the issues that we have to bear in mind. And finally, on this slide, I would like to mention about the new regionalism. These couple of only a couple of examples here. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization (SCO) that was established in June 2001, and I'd like to show you the membership of this Shanghai Cooperation Organization. And as you see, there are 6 countries, the members to this organization, and both China and Russia, the members to this organization. This year, in September, they had the 13th heads of the government meeting of SCO, and they talked about, for instance, judicial cooperation among 6 countries. They talk about rule of law. They talk about market economy and so forth. But increasingly, you know, it appears to me that you know, when they talk about rule of law, when they talk about judicial cooperation, despite the fact that we use the same wording, but are we really using those expressions with the same meaning? You know, it's are they talking about you know, the human rights or anti-terrorism? Are we really talking the same things? And that's always put me in kind of questions. The other one is the Russian center, the Russia-centered customs union. That's a 3-country customs union between Russia, Belarus, and Kazakhstan. That was established also January 2010, and this is going to develop into Eurasia Union. That is Mr. Putin's big idea, blueprint for the future of Greater Russia. But the problem is the couple of countries that are to be included in this Russia-centered customs union or Eurasia Union, they are not yet members to WTO. And even to some countries like Kyrgyzstan or Uzbekistan or Moldova, their bound rates committed to the WTO is between 7.0 and 7.5%, which is lower than their common external tariff of this customs union, which is 10%. So, you know, if the WTO concessionary rates are fixed, let's say for Moldova, 7.0%, and if this customs union keeps this 10% of common external tariff, there is a gap of 3%. And without providing compensation, for instance, country like Moldova cannot join this customs union. So there are a number of serious issues whether they are WTO consistent or not. So that kind of new regionalism, which could be going against the WTO or the Bretton system, and that remains a source of concern and uncertainties in the region. So I'd like to go on to this slide, talking about the responses or challenges in Asia Pacific. In Asia Pacific, there has been quite a significant progress about the market integration. But in that region, it's not like in the European Union. European Union is more institution-driven, de jure type of integration, whereas in East Asia, it's more the FDI, foreign direct investment, FDI-driven integration, and I would call that de facto business-driven integration through establishing supply chains and production networks. And I think the trigger for that was the Plaza Accord back in September 1985. There was a significant sort of realignment of exchange rate. The Japanese yen had been upvalued, and many Japanese manufacturers started to move out from Japan and establish their production of parts and components abroad, particularly to the neighboring ASEAN countries like Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, and later certainly Taiwan, Hong Kong, and mainland China. So that was the FDI-driven integration, and it's a kind of the integration through establishing the supply chain. So the parts and components have been moving from one country to another within the region, and taking advantage of sometimes ASEAN free trade area arrangements like CEPT scheme. CEPT scheme stands for Common Effective Tariff Preferences. So by and large, the East Asian integration is more on the basis of this supply chain or production networks. But now, on this de facto business-driven integration, the East Asian countries started to make free trade agreements amongst the ASEAN countries, or ASEAN plus one, namely ASEAN plus Korea, ASEAN plus China, ASEAN plus Japan, Australia and New Zealand did the same. So in this way, there has been the accumulation of ASEAN plus one type of free trade agreements. So those FTAs or EPAs in the case of Japan was considered to be somewhat consolidate the merits of the de facto integration. And now this movement of bilateral FTAs or EPAs now enlarging its scope and becoming more to the wider regional FTA EPAs, like ASEAN plus 3 or ASEAN plus 6. ASEAN plus 3 was the proposal made by China back in 2004, and ASEAN plus 6 was the proposal made by Japan in 2006. But after quite lengthy discussions, now it seems that RCEP, Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, comprising 10 countries of ASEAN plus Japan, China, Korea, and Australia, New Zealand, and India. Those ASEAN plus 6 are the constituencies of RCEP. In addition, we have also trilateral FTA under negotiation from this year, March it started, Japan, China, Korea FTA. So we have a number of wider spectrum type of FTA or EPAs. So another development that I would see very important, significant one is those trade arrangements are now going beyond on its own region, and it's more kind of interregional arrangements like TPP for the Asia Pacific. That is the kind of challenges and responses in Asia Pacific. Now, I'd like to show you this one, agenda of the TPP, but I think the audience here are quite well informed about TPP, so just if it is necessary, I can always come back to this slide, but it's a 21 subject matters to be dealt with under TPP, and there are now 12 countries, Japan being included since July this year. And this is also the different frameworks of membership that I have talked about in this region of Asia Pacific. We have TPP, which accounts more or less, the 38% of the world GDP. And I'd like to stress the importance of Japan's dual membership. Japan is a member to RCEP, but at the same time, Japan joins the TPP negotiation. So Japan has a kind of dual membership in those two very, very important major inter-regional framework for free trade agreements. This is to show you Japan, China, Korea. I would call it a missing piece of jigsaw puzzle. Unfortunately, there was no agreement of FTA between those three countries, although the proportion of trade to each of those components are extremely important. But because of the historical difficulties, because of the historical issues or territorial issues, unfortunately, we couldn't proceed as we have so wished. But nevertheless, Japan, China, Korea, FTA, the trial JCK FTA has started earlier this year. But it seems that Korea is more interested in making closer ties with China before Japan joins. So Korea gives priority to FTA with China first before any significant development among speed could be produced. Next slide is just to show you the APEC-wide free trade area we call FTAAP, free trade area of Asia Pacific, that now APEC leaders agreed in Yokohama back in 2010. And this is the kind of roadmap that they have drawn in Yokohama, that there are several different frameworks like CEPRA 6, which is now called RCEP, and CJK, China, Japan, Korea, trilateral FTA, and TPP going into the FTAAP, the free trade area of Asia Pacific. But obviously, there is not so much significant progress made either in RCEP or in the trilateral FTA. And while the very significant negotiations have been proceeded in the area, in the negotiations of TPP. So TPP would be a kind of front runner of this roadmap of making of the FTAAP. Now I'd like to turn to the how Japan reacts to this movement of making of free trade agreements and the regional integration in Asia Pacific. We started this EPA back in 2001. The first negotiation was with Singapore, and that started in the early part of 2001 and ended up in October 2001. And this first Japan's EPA with Singapore came into force as November 2002. So about a decade ago, so 10 years have passed since. And the very important characteristics of Japanese EPA is that it's a comprehensive coverage. We have FTA, which is a central part of EPA. And FTA traditionally deals with the improvement of market access, both trade in goods and services. So that's still a very important central part of FTA. But we have several other elements like government procurement, movement of natural persons, competition, and bilateral cooperation or business environment, improvement of business environment, and most importantly, perhaps, a chapter on investment. And I'd like to draw your attention, for instance, to this chapter on investment that try to include pre-entry or pre-establishment MFN or pre-establishment national treatment. Pre-establishment national treatment or MFN. MFN stands for most favored nation treatment, but that implies that the liberalization of investment are considered to be a very important element, not only the protection of investment. We have a number of BIAs, bilateral investment agreements, but BIAs are originally designed to protect the investment or invested assets. And recently, many countries, including Japan, have been trying to bring in the liberalization elements into the bilateral investment arrangements or agreements. So the pre-establishment or pre-entry MFN or pre-entry national treatment, those are the very important elements to make those bilateral investment agreements attractive for the foreign direct investment investors. If Japanese investors want to invest in a country like Malaysia or Indonesia, they want to be treated no less favorable than the domestic investors or nor any third country investors. So this element of pre-entry or pre-establishment MFN or national treatment are very important element when we talk about the contemporary agreement on investment. And in Japanese EPAs, that is incorporated into this investment chapter. So this slide shows you that some achievement Japan has been making, and from Singapore being the first one to conclude FTA with Japan, now down to Peru, we have 13 EPAs, including one with ASEAN as one. So this is the list of achievement so far, and this covers roughly 20% of Japan's external trade. And those countries like Korea, GCC, Australia, Mongolia, Canada, Colombia, particularly those countries like Mongolia, Canada, Colombia, with those three countries, so we started to negotiate last year. With Korea, unfortunately, has been suspended since November 2004. Australia is also being kind of pending issue because of agriculture. Next slide is to show you the substance of Japan's EPA and to what extent those elements are covered in each of respective bilateral EPAs. Well, if you're interested in, I can always come back to this. Next slide I'd like to show you is the what I mentioned about the dual membership of Japan. Japan being a member to RCEP and also negotiating partner in TPP. So you see, the Japan has done about a dozen of bilateral EPAs, and we are now moving forward in a wider spectrum of RCEP in East Asia and Pacific Rim free trade agreement, that is TPP. And in the case of RCEP, it is more integration-oriented approach. By that I mean that Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, and Vietnam, those countries who joined ASEAN slightly later than original 6 countries, their development level still much lagging behind those of more developed ASEAN countries. So in order to provide them the kind of inclusive growth in its totality of ASEAN countries, Japan will be ready to provide the facilitation as well as capacity building in the area of investment or in the area of competition policies, in the area possibly the government procurement and so forth. So it is by and large designed to try to provide the facilitation and capacity building to bring them up and make them more comfortable with the same boat of ASEAN plus 6. The TPP is more advanced in terms of tariff regulations as well as rulemaking and regulatory coherence, harmonization of standards, that kind of thing would be more important. So Japan could play a very important role there because, as I have shown you, the Japan's EPA covered extensively those areas such as competition or investment or government procurement. So Japan has already kind of model agreement in those respective areas. So we could lead the rule-making negotiations in the TPP. And the results to be produced in the TPP negotiations can be always reflected in the RCEP. And of course, the degree of RCEP agreement on investment or RCEP agreement on competition can be somewhat lower in quality than that of TPP rules. But nevertheless, it will provide opportunities for those countries, particularly in ASEAN, to assimilate themselves into the future sort of rule-making in those respective areas such as competition, investment, government procurement, and so forth. So altogether, the kind of coherence to bring all the countries into this final goal of FTAP, free trade area of Asia Pacific. So that is the kind of the idea that I'd like to share with you, how Japan will go on in terms of FTA or EPA negotiations. This slide is even going beyond the Asia Pacific region. Now, I would like to tell you that the EU is now 28-member economic integration in the form of economic and monetary union. And across the Atlantic, we have NAFTA here, North America, United States, Canada, and United States of Mexico, the constituent territories of NAFTA. We have also Central America, FTA, and we have Mercosur and Alianza del Pacifico, comprising 4 countries, like Mexico, Peru, Colombia, and Chile. So entire American continent, so we have several frameworks of economic integration, but certainly the most important one is NAFTA. And we have East Asia that I have so far explained extensively. So there are 3 growth poles, one is being EU and the other NAFTA and East Asia. And integrations have been very profoundly moving on, progressing. But on the 21st century type of regionalism, we have more interesting phenomena in comparison with the regionalism of 1930s. That is the inter-regional frameworks, like between East Asia and Pacific Rim countries of Americas, we have APEC. And that's 21 member economies and accounting over 50% of world GDP. And we have also, between East Asia and the EU, we have ASEM. ASEM is quite a bit of mirror image to APEC. And APEC started in 1989, and ASEM started in 1996. And both APEC and ASEM is a kind of inter-regional cooperation frameworks to keep those two regions, EU and East Asia on one hand, and the Americas and East Asia on the other, try to keep the windows of opportunity open to each other. So it's a kind of the mutual trust or confidence building measure between two regions, and each of the regions, the integration has been proceeding. Likewise, between EU and NAFTA, we have transatlantic marketplace or transatlantic economic council before, but now we have what we call TTIP. TTIP is a trade and investment partnership across the transatlantic countries. So now what we have is, on the basis of APEC, we have TPP. On the basis of transatlantic marketplace, we have TTIP. And between EU and Asia, we have Japan-EU EPA under negotiation, or we have Korea-EU FTA that is already concluded. So this 21st century regionalism is very interesting. Not only each of the regions and making progress in its own regional integration, but also we have the inter-regional frameworks. And inter-regional frameworks have themselves also kind of in progress. And APEC is non-binding organization for trade and investment. But now TPP is certainly binding. So moving from non-binding to binding. And ASEM likewise, it's non-binding inter-regional cooperation framework. But now Japan and the EU try to bind themselves with new types of free trade agreements. And TTIP likewise. So if we are to be successful in the making of a kind of convergence of rules, when we talk about competition between Japan and EU, competition, cooperation, or anti-monopoly cooperation between Japan and the United States, why not? This could be a good basis for the multilateral rule on competition. Likewise, investment, you see. There is a tendency that more and more countries engaged in the negotiation to include those pre-entry or pre-establishment MFN or national treatment in their new bilateral investment agreement. Even the United States and China now discussing about pre-entry, pre-establishment MFN and national treatment. China agreed to that. So possibly we could recuperate what we have lost in Cancun back in 2003. So that's the kind of the idea. So if we are to be successful in making new rules and TPP and TTIP and maybe later RCEP, then we can make a convergence of those rules into multilateral rules. So what I would like to suggest is multilateralizing regionalism, the convergence of liberalization efforts in the three mega FTAs like TPP or TTIP, Japan-EU EPA, or maybe later RCEP. And that could create a new momentum to reinforce trade multilateralism that is embodied in WTO. Japan, US, and EU should work together for multilateral as well as interregional trade and investment agreement. So concluding remarks is that I think we have to increase this coherence. Japan is now engaged in several mega FTAs. The one is TPP, and that's cover Asia Pacific. And it implies that Japan is negotiating now an ultimate FTA with our ultimate partner, that is the United States. RCEP, in its Southeast Asia, is largely to provide with a legal framework to secure de facto business-driven integration. And Japan, China, Korea, the trilateral one, this is a missing part to do so, but we'd like to fulfill that. Japan EU FTA that we started this year, this is towards an Asia-Europe partnership that could provide a good platform for both Japan and EU to work on this coherent trade, free trade movements between Asia and Europe. So joint efforts to multilateralize the preferential deals with a view to strengthening the WTO. So that's the way that Japan would like to proceed in the future of our trade policies. Well, thank you very much. Let me conclude with this picture: free trade for a better future. Thank you very much indeed.
We would like to welcome your participation now. Making your comment or question, you give us your name and your organization which you belong to. Thank you very much. Yeah, floor is open.
Anybody?
Who is going to be the first? Yes?
My name is Watanabe as well. I also graduated from Keio University's SFC campus. But before you joined SFC,
Good to see you.
I have a quick question about the progress on WTO. You mentioned that TPP and TTIP and also the Japan EU EPA could be the driving force to make progress in WTO. But I believe there will be different progress within these each regional FTA negotiations. So I was wondering which one of these will be the driving force to make the progress in WTO? Would it be the TPP that possibly be concluded in the negotiation later this year?
Okay. Well, thank you very much for your question. I think I understand your question in the sense that you are asking which mega regional FTA can influence, say, positively to the development of WTO.
Yes.
Well, that's a very good question, but it's difficult to answer because it seems, I would say that TPP is most advanced in terms of rule making, and rules such as investment, competition, or certain disciplines on state-owned enterprises and so forth. So TPP has been certainly ahead of other mega regional agreements. So in that sense, I would like to answer to your question. Yes, TPP is the one influencing on WTO's future progress. But unfortunately, I detected here, particularly in Washington, D.C., there's a kind of very deep or very high degree of mistrust in WTO. So it is not not really ideal to talk about WTO here in Washington D.C. I detected this atmosphere that there is a kind of overwhelming mistrust on WTO. Therefore, there is a tendency here in Washington D.C. that the TPP progress should be delinked from WTO. So, but I think I think Japanese trade policy makers will not think in that way. I mean, because Japan's recourse to FTAs are always trying to seek WTO consistency. So WTO is the main avenue for trade liberalization, and FTAs are considered to be complementary to our multilateral effort of trade liberalization or investment liberalization. And TPP is precisely one of FTAs anyway. So I would think that trying to project the TPP progress as a kind of complementary to future WTO. See? So in that sense, I'd like to again, with some careful sort of optimism that TPP will be the most important one to influence on WTO. But at the same time, European Union, not like in Washington DC, but in Brussels, there's more trust on multilateral system. So it is my feeling that Japan and EU, when we talk about bilateral FTA, we try to make it as WTO consistent as possible. So perhaps in that sense, Japan should play a very important role together with European Union to make this WTO consistency in our making of rules and try to bring back the possible results straight away to WTO future discussions on issues such as investment and competition. Thank you.
My name is Lloyd Peace, and my interest is, I just came back from Japan. My son has a school in Setagaya, and has had owned and operated this English language school for about 8 or 9 years, and while I was there, I became interested in the TPP. So my question is two-part. Number one, this is based on the political climate in Washington, D.C. Why is there such a an interest in completing the TPP negotiations by the end of this calendar year, or as soon as possible? And then number two, what do you think Japan's response will be to managing the agricultural as well as the automobile tariff issue?
Well, thank you very much. When I jump onto the taxi in Tokyo, I make it myself a kind of rule to ask whether the taxi drivers are for the TPP or against TPP. And usually they have very clear idea about TPP, and then they have also very clear sort of opinion about TPP. And as long as I ask the same question in Tokyo or Osaka, in big cities, usually the answers the taxi drivers give me affirmative. And if you ask the same question to any taxi driver here in Washington D.C. or New York, yellow cabs, I think they would ask, what is TPP? I know maybe TP, the teacher parents TPA or PTA or but anyway, the Japanese population are very much aware of TPP. Not necessarily, all of them are very clear about it, but at least they are interested in, and they follow very carefully newspapers or the TV shows, debates, or through those media. So maybe when you come back to Washington D.C. from Tokyo, and then you see the difference of the temperature on TPP between Tokyo and Washington D.C. So your first question is why the TPP to be concluded towards the end of this year,
Or ASAP, as soon as possible.
as soon as possible. Your question is related to Japanese view or U.S. view?
Probably the U.S. view, especially with the House of Representatives, and how they may use I guess maybe the shroud of secrecy for some of the negotiations against the current administration?
Well, first of all, Mr. Obama has already made his own pledge that this would be winded up towards the end of this year. So maybe that was kind of the pledge that he made, and he wants to honor his own pledge. That's maybe the logic of White House. But at the same time, it was the same President Obama who didn't come to the Bali meeting. And the Bali meeting really kind of it's a missed showcase of TPP without the presence of Mr. Obama. So because Mr. Obama was supposed to chair that meeting.
China was there.
Yeah. So it was kind of the missed occasion. And obviously after this government shutdown here in Washington D.C., the trade issues are kind of withdrawal of priority issues. Right? So I wonder to what extent now the United States government is determined to bring all negotiation to the end. But on the working level, officials level, they have been making a lot of efforts, and a lot of intersessional contacts are being made, and officials are, despite the fact that Mr. Obama was absent in the Bali meeting, officials have been working very seriously on this. So we have still some hope that those are to be wrapped up. But it should be understood that the most important part of negotiation, that is market access negotiation, that has not been really making a lot of progress. This traditional part, all the issue of tariff elimination, proved to be the most difficult, the most sensitive part of the entire TPP negotiations. So I am not so optimistic that everything can be concluded towards the end of this year. So perhaps what we could agree upon towards the end of this year is a kind of framework agreement. And the real substance on the market liberalization, duty eliminations, those are to be wrapped up somewhat, the earlier part of next year. That would be more realistic sort of assessment of the situation, I think. Your question about Japanese agriculture. There again, I'm not so optimistic, but nowadays the Japanese newspapers like Nikkei or the Asahi have been reporting that the governments are now thinking, particularly the Ministry of Agriculture, proposing the several reform plans, such as reducing the income subsidy for the farming population, particularly those farming population who participate in the what we call set-aside arrangement of reduction of acreage of rice pad. They receive now 15,000 yen or 10 acres, but that would be first reduced to half, only 7,500, and this is due to be completely scrapped within 5 years or so. So that is a kind of signs indicating that Ministry of Agriculture is now contemplating the possibility of structural reform of Japanese agriculture. And in the rice production, there are 67% of rice farmers are what we call part-time farmers. Because of the development of agriculture machineries, tools, those people, the rice farming population, are very busy only when they are seeding and harvesting. And in between, they can work only weekends. So from Monday to Friday, they work maybe in the factories, for instance, in the Aichi prefecture, those farmers working in the Toyota or Toyota-related affiliated companies from Monday to Friday, and only the weekend they work in the rice plant, or even the weekend they don't. So you see, the 67% of the rice farming population are part-timers, and the average income that they have is more or less between 6 million and 7 million Japanese yen, out of which only maybe a million, maybe just a million, they earn from rice production. So I think the very important thing is agricultural reform, to put all those rice pad farming, the rice pads more concentrated, and then make it larger sort of operation, because now the average rice farming household has 1.9 hectares per household, but this should be, something like beyond 20, 30 hectares per agricultural household to compete with foreign suppliers of rice. So that is kind of reform that we could envisage in the due course. And thanks to TPP, finally, this most difficult area or most protected segment of Japanese economy now under pressure to reform. So I think that is altogether very positive for not only for Japanese agriculture, but also entire Japanese economy. So despite the fact that I can't be still very optimistic about this, but there is a kind of step-by-step sort of change in the area of agriculture in order to make it more competitive in the world market. So Japanese agriculture so far has been very defensive, putting high duty rates like 778% of rice. You would be amazed, because our duty rate is on imported cars is 0. Our industrial tariffs, the average of our industrial tariffs is only 1.9%. But we have agriculture, very high protective or even prohibitive duty rates on rice, wheat 252%, butter 360%, and so forth. But that kind of thing, are we really in need of that? So TPP provides us a very good occasion to rethink about our agriculture, and hope that this works out in that way. And Japan would become not only defensive, on agriculture, but also kind of aggressive or offensive. That means that Japanese rice can be exported to the neighboring countries. Japanese fruits like strawberries now taking advantage of Japan-Thai EPA, zero duty entry to Thailand, zero duty entry to several other countries of the region. So that kind of mentality change or mindset change really required in agriculture. So there's kind of cautious optimism prevailing myself about Japanese agriculture in the future.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. My name is Takahiro Yoshino, and I'm also a university student. Yeah, I'm just studying temporary American University.
Yeah.
And as you mentioned in your excellent presentation, over 70% of the world could be covered by the mega regional trade agreement. My question is kind of big, but I would like to know how the rest of world could be included.
Very good question. Well, thank you very much. It's a very good question because, yes, and I wanted to touch upon that issue. Why I'm talking about multilateralizing regionalism is precisely related to your question. Yes, it is very good that we will make progress in TPP, and both US and EU make progress in TTIP, and also Japan, China, Korea will be successful in the CJK, trilateral FTA. All things are very good, and it covers well above 70% of GDP, world GDP. But we should not forget the rest of the world, and particularly those smaller countries that have never been sort of involved in the making of the large-scale FTAs, and precisely the most favored nation treatment embodied in WTO is the remedy to those countries. So that's why I said that we have to multilateralize those regional arrangements or inter-regional arrangements. For instance, if Japan brings down the agriculture duties much lower than the present levels, then these duty rates would be also applied to the products coming from developing countries. Of course, it is not automatic, but already we have GSP. GSP stands for the Generalized System of Preferences. That's considered to be lower than WTO bound rates. So if we are to agree on the lower the agricultural duties, be it in TPP or be it in RCEP or be it in CJK, then there would be a very good environment for Japan itself to lower further the duties for the products, agricultural products coming from less developed countries or least developed countries. So often this agricultural protectionism was the hindrance for Japan to provide lower GSPs. So if we are to be successful in the TPP negotiation or any other negotiations, then there will be much more possibility for Japan to give them or provide them, the developing countries, the lower GSP rates. So that's for sure. I think this way the multilateralizing regional arrangements has significant impact on the trade with least developed countries or less developed countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Great presentation. I'm Takashara, CSS, originally from New Thought Justice. May I ask a very personal question?
Sure.
And Professor Watanabe, and yesterday
I'm married.
yes. And yesterday you mentioned and USTR and Wendy Kotora is your old and good friend.
Yes.
So I want to ask you and her personality and how about is she and aggressive? Is she and hard negotiator? And is she and strategician or tactician? It's my simple question. Because and humility is my work.
Well, thank you very much. Yesterday at the conference, I was very much privileged to sit next to Wendy Katra. Wendy Katra and myself worked together during the years 1986-88 in WTO. I mean, at that time it was still the GATT, and we have the GATT Tokyo Round Code on government procurement, and we were engaged in the discussions to enlarge the entities to be covered by government procurement agreement of GATT, and also improvement of the texts. For instance, one of the texts that we really discussed was the language issue. Japanese Kanpo, the Japanese official gazette, every day, they make the kind of public notice about possible government procurement above threshold value stipulated in GATT GPA. And before this amendment came into effect only Japanese language was used in Japanese kampo. And Japanese kampo, because this is Japanese, so there was no sort of incentive for government agencies to make it even partially in English. So there was a very strong opposition coming from Japanese government that to the proposal that three official languages, one of them English, the three official languages of the GATT and WTO, English, French, and Spanish. And at least one of those official languages should be used in the official gazette publication of the public notice of possible government procurement. So that was a kind of discussion that we have been making. Miss Katra, at that time she was not the USDR. She started her career the Commerce Department. So I think I didn't, I think she is not really that aggressive in her posture, in her style. She is not really very aggressive, but she is a very deliberate person. She really thinks very well, and her knowledge about Japan or Japanese system, how government works, how government officials function, what kind of decision-making process should be taken. I think all that she is quite familiar with. So she is a very capable person, very deliberate person. And she is the person who works with a very cool mind and logical thinking, I think. So she is really the good negotiator for Japan and for any other countries.
Thank you very much. Very useful information.
Well, sorry. Yes.
Thank you very much, Dr. Watanabe, for your profound probing presentation.
Thank you.
My name is Shinichi Sobe, visiting fellow with CSIS from Central. So thank you again for great support to our activities for always. My question is regarding to the TPP, especially the risk that Japan and US has to take when the conclusion of TPP will be delayed. I think the most biggest potential breakdown in TPP is the lack of TPA in Obama administration, as Dr. mentioned in the slide. One of the speakers at the yesterday's Pearson's event was focusing that the TPA bill will not be introduced until next spring. But if it is true, the United States is going to election season for midterm election in November, so it might be delayed more. So if it happens for the U.S., they will lose the bridge to Asia. So the Obama administration's goal to create jobs through export will not be realized. And also to Japan, the TPP is too related to the third hour strategy. So if the conclusion will be delayed, maybe the Japanese government will lose momentum to do the deregulation. From a view, I think the other negotiating parties without the U.S. has to put pressure on the U.S. to gain TPA bill as fast as they can. So from doctors, we have to evaluate this and how we should.
Well, thank you very much for your question. Maybe that question could be dealt with the audience, other people here, how they think. I think you know much better what's going on here in Washington D.C. than myself. only a couple of days that I am here, but talking to the people of Washington D.C., the think tank people, and so forth, I collected some kind of pessimism about trade issue here. The most recent speech by President Obama didn't touch upon the trade issues, and trade issues really is not even number 3 priority. And well, despite the fact that the Obama too, particularly before the midterm election, usually the presidents in the past they could exercise their competence quite extensively, but not this time. And I think without having U.S. initiatives, without having very strong U.S. initiatives, it could be very difficult to wrap up TPP. So I think the Japanese government has been quite making a kind of follow-up of U.S. original intention to wrap up TPP negotiation by the end of this year. But the United States should make it clear that their determination should be demonstrated in due course. Yes, lack of TPA is really the challenge for the not only for the United States but for others as well. But if TPA would be granted to executive body of the United States prior to the conclusion of substantial agreement of the TPP, and that should be fine. So the TPA is the very important element, but it seems that neither White House nor Congress, there is no sort of strong determination to go ahead with TPA, and that's a source of concern for me. At the same time, as you said, we have to keep it in our minds that without TPP, maybe there could be less determination to go ahead with TTIP, and China and other countries in East Asia might look at lack of progress in TPP. It's a good sort of justification not to work hard on RCEP nor CJK trilaterals. So I think if TPP would be slowing down, that would have a very negative sort of ramifications and impacts on other negotiations, and that really affects entire multilateral trade community as well. You see, so I think the TPP is holding a key to better and sound maintenance of a trading system, open and transparent trading system to be maintained or not. That really, the very critical moment we are standing on, I think. Yes. So you talk about the third arrow strategy of Abenomics or Abe government. Yes, again, because of TPP, because of the external pressure, Abe government has been doing quite well so far about reform of agriculture, reform of medical certifications, non-tariff measures, and so forth. So if TPP will be slowed down, there would be also negative sort of effects on the speed and the velocity of Japan's internal reform as well. So I hope that the U.S. Administration, particularly President Obama, will show kind of determination or his clear signals to proceed the TPP negotiation to a successful conclusion.
Thank you very much for a great presentation. My name is Sato Wakabayashi. I am a graduate student at American University. And I understand the importance of being part of free trade agreements, like as country levels, but I have to wonder what kind of negative impacts it can bring about to individual levels, to especially people where they live in countries like the great inequality or the gap between the rich and poor exists, like Mexico. Because in the past, economic liberalization did not necessarily bring about the benefits to everybody like it had been expected, and it widened the gap between the richer and the poor. And I think for the poor, because of this system, I think it's going to benefit the richer, but not necessarily the poor. Do you think, for example, TPP is going to be more inclusive in terms of like benefit the majority of people, or it's going to widen the gap between the poor and the rich?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, well, thank you very much. You also touched upon a very, very important element when we talk about freer trade or freer investment. So I'm very grateful to that. Your question, what kind of negative effects, particularly to the people, in the greater inequality, as you put it? Yes, there is a tendency that the free trade is a logic of the strong, and the rich people get richer and poor people poorer. First of all, I'd like to tell you that trade or investment, trade and investment are not really the panacea for solving all these issues of inequality or poverty. But I still believe in what Alfred Marshall said. Alfred Marshall said that the world is not rich enough to forget about efficiency. So I think the efficiency resulting from fair competition is still a very important element in order to keep the better allocation of resource through in the market mechanism. So, that is a kind of sort of basic sort of foundation of free trade or free investment. I would like to also draw your attention to what happened to East Asia. East Asia, particularly those ASEAN countries, those countries, particularly like a country like Malaysia or Thailand, in 1980s or even towards the late 1970s, what they did was quite clear, not to cut off or not to de-link their national economies from international economies. On the contrary, what they did was, they tried to connect their domestic markets to international markets through trade and investment. And what happened to them, say, Malaysia? In Malaysia, when I visited for the first time in early 1980s, Malaysia was still very relatively poor country. The country totally dependent on natural resources such as natural rubber. But now, if you go to Kuala Lumpur, you'll be amazed that it's a green city, it's a park, it's like a park city you have the monorail, you have subway, you have all kinds of public transportation, and they're very clean. And I think the Malaysia very successfully connect their domestic markets into international markets through both international trade and international investment. Likewise, Thailand, likewise the Philippines. So of course we have some problems, but the overall development of last 10, 20 years of those countries clearly indicate that the free trade is better than delinking of national economies from the rest of the world. Those countries who shut off the connectivity, like North Korea, or like Tanzania in Africa in 1970s, Cuba, those countries have seemingly lagging behind the world development. So if you look at this development of East Asia, it is clear that connectivity is very important. Connectivity is the key element to make those countries richer. And inequality within the domestic context, that's a matter to be dealt with within the country, provided that there is a democracy. So democracy and international trade are very much linked. So that is the very important element. And if you know the flying geese model, the East Asia development is a flying geese. Japan started as a non-Western country. It started, say, from light industry such as textiles, and then the comparative advantage. They moved from Japan to Taiwan, Taiwan to Korea, Korea to subsequent countries, and this was a way that the all entire East Asia have been now flying. Japan did not, withhold the comparative advantage of textile industries. This comparative advantage moved from one country to another, and Korea did the same. Now Thailand, in terms of auto industry, auto parts industries, in Thailand it's flourishing. Now, if you go to say countries like Laos, Myanmar, the labor-intensive industries are now moving from Thailand to Laos, or from Vietnam to Myanmar. Why? Because of this labor cost. So, in this way, following the shift from the one country to another, the shift of comparative advantage, all countries are bound to prosper through freer trade. See, so that is what we have achieved in the last 2-3 decades. So now China is jumping in, but China is also, participating in this kind of flying geese model of development. So what is important is the freer movement of investment. The country like Myanmar is now taking advantage of this freer movement of investment. And those products made in Myanmar can be freely exported to the richer countries. You see those textiles made in Myanmar, those footwear made in Laos, should be without any hindrance, without any prohibitive duties, get into the higher countries, so that export earnings will come to those countries to become richer. So that is the kind of vision that we have already witnessed in the last 2-3 decades in the East Asian development. So I hope that this will continue like this. That is the kind of scenario that I'd like to present to you as an answer to your question. If you have any follow-up, you're very much welcome to do that.
We already hit 3:30, but one more question, if you. Sure, no problem. One more
Maybe
question.
that young lady wants to ask something, some additional questions.
Oh, it's okay. I will leave the time to others.
Last one got to be the best.
No, you put the pressure on
No.
me.
Anybody? Okay, then let's have.
どうもありがとうございました。ありがとうございます。